G'day legends, I hope that you're all well. Now there is so much fog of war right now, and personally I actually think some of it is on purpose, creating some kind of like online information smokescreen, and this is really coming before I think we'll start seeing some things happen, and we are seeing little bits and pieces happening, but it's hard to report on as so much of it is just speculation and rumours, and that's how operations a lot of time in small scale absolutely work. But today we're going to skip the maps because absolutely nothing has changed, and we're going to dive right into the sea, talk about Navy and some ships, and we're going to look at the air and do a bit of a deep dive on what effect these F-16s will have. And the big speculation point has been around the Russian surveillance ship, the Ivan Kurs. Now, let's have a look on the map here. I said we're not going to do it, but there's no actual change up the front line. But this is the Black Sea, Sea of Azov, and through here is the Bosphorus into this sea here. Now, Russian Navy boats can cross the Bosphorus, but they have to have a home port within the Black Sea. And this is under a treaty since 1939. So they can cross here, but Turkey do control that as of wartime with special privileges as well. So that's just the layout of where things actually are. Now, what has actually happened? Was it struck? Did it sink? Is it in its home port? Well, we're going to go over this and have a talk about it, but I will tell you, we're not going to get to a definite conclusion either. Now, Russia has released this video of what they say is successfully intercepting the one of the side kamikaze ships hitting it. So this is the video here, and we roll through, we see the tracer rounds going at it, and then it explodes from there and zooms out. There's nothing distinctive about where this is. We can't see anything in the background other than, the sky and the sea, and we can't geolocate anything off that, nor do we have time of day other than trace hitting this. Now, you can see that this is a kamikaze boat speeding towards the ship that was then engaged. But I did talk to a gentleman today, and he did suggest from his experience this is handling more like a motorboat rather than one of these kamikaze drone boats. But I can say that I have no idea. And he did say too, have a look at the two together. And he said, have a look at the one that washed up and this one. Now, I'm not saying this is anything definitive. He just said to have a look at it. So if we can make this fit a little bit better. He just said that it looks on the front a little bit different and how it picks up. Now, my eye, I don't know. I don't think the footage is good enough to make that assessment. But when it does turn, it does look somewhat different here. But again, that is just purely speculation, and maybe the size. But again, purely speculation just from someone who talked about how he saw it handling in the water. But if it did hit, how much damage can it really do? And I guess that's the real question, as we do have more footage of supposedly it hitting. Now, there is this footage that we talked about yesterday, and you can see the Ivan Kurs in the background here from a camera on top of seemingly the kamikaze drone coming into the ship. You can see multiple trace rounds being shot. I've seen so many channels saying that, like, how did they not even act or think to engage this and didn't see it? You can clearly see like heaps of trace rounds and rounds bouncing off the water coming at this. So I don't know, but you can see it then turn into the right and then come up to the bow of the ship. And then the video cuts out here as it is making a turn left and a fairly sharp turn right at the end. We see, I'm not really sure why it didn't go straight in on the back, but then it does that sharp turn and the video then cuts out. But the cut could be in place of the explosion, or it could be cut. Both are not definitive to exactly what it is. We also have this footage that has been released today, saying from Ukrainian sources of the ship, surveillance of the ship, and then this hitting here. And that's where it hit. You can see this is really rough, so it's actually smoother than me pulling through. You can see this plume as supposedly it is hit and then on fire in the background here and the ship. But I don't think that is anything that is absolute definite proof either. And we don't know. Now, I'm no explosive expert, but I probably know a little bit more than the average lad or ladette on YouTube. So we're going to talk about that a little bit too. Now, everything with explosives follows the path of least resistance. And I've got some photographs here we're going to go over. And this is the reason for, on the Bushmaster vehicles, which I was a crew commander of a Bushmaster, we have V-shaped hulls to deflect the explosion away from the people inside and deflect it, and path of least resistance, the explosion will come out on the side. And we're going to talk about this a little bit, and I'm very familiar with these vehicles. So here we have a Bushmaster PMV, Protected Mobility Vehicle here. And you can see the hull. This isn't actually the greatest photo, but you can see above the wheels where the hull is this V shape, and it comes down right like this. So that is the V-shaped hull. Now, this is one that has been then in an explosion. Now, all the boxes, the wheels, everything on a Bushmaster is actually made to peel off and blow off in an explosion. As you can see here, this Bushmaster in Afghanistan has hit an IED. The stuff that normally sits on the side, making it look square, has blown off. It's blown off and has protected the crew inside. No one has ever been killed inside of a Bushmaster, at least up until they were deployed to Ukraine. Now, I'm not saying that people have been, but we have seen footage of these destroyed, and I can't comment on whether people have or haven't. But no one had up until that point, proving that the V-shaped hull and these were an incredible vehicle. Now, we'll just show another photo to sort of show you again what I'm talking about. So these are the bins on the side that then in an explosion, these bins peel off. But what I'm getting at is the explosions follow the path of least resistance. Now, this is an IED going off in Afghanistan as well with Bushmaster PMVs. Here you can see the V-shaped hull just at the back here, and path of least resistance. You can see it coming up and out. That is the path of least resistance. It's one explosion, just go straight down, go straight up. It's the dirt. Path of least resistance. I've gone about 1 million times. This is not a Bushmaster, but a trial another vehicle with V-shaped hull. And again, you can see the shockwave here going out, but it is deflecting away from the people inside, protecting them. Again, path of least resistance. And I promise this will all make sense in a minute, but continuing on talking about explosions and how weapons work, this is why people who don't know what they're on about call things cope cages, and we'll also talk about explosive reactive armour. But the cope cage. So we saw these built onto Russian tanks, and this rudimentary cage over the top of the tank. Now, this is a fairly rough looking one, but we've seen these pop up from the very beginning of the war through till today. We're still seeing them everywhere. Now, what is the cope cage? Why do they have this? And we'll also talk about what these plates are on the front. Now, has the cope cage been ineffective against some weapon systems? Absolutely. Has it been effective against others? Absolutely as well. Now, the reason you can take the piss out of this is because this is just so rudimentary, welded up in your mate's shed. But the cope cage, what you would call it, is a real thing. Now, I think the Americans call it slat armor, but I would call it bar armor. And here we have an ASLAV with bar armor, another American vehicle here with bar armor. And as well, we have a Leopard 2A6 with, bar armor, cope cage. That stuff really works. And there's been many times that has saved many lives, and even down to RPGs stuck in the side of it. Now, how does that actually work? What is the point? What is the point of this separation of something like this or something like this? Now, this one's a little bit rougher, but on the top as well, and we'll talk about why it's on the top compared to on the sides as you're facing different enemies. Now, the big thing in this is shaped charges. Now, what is a shaped charge? How does it work? And I actually have here, we're going to pull up an RPG. We're going to talk about an RPG. Why do you think that all the vehicles in Afghan Iraq were running that armour, that bars, was for RPGs? Also, who operate RPGs? Both the Russians and the Ukrainians. So that is why bar armor on the side of vehicles is a real thing and definitely does work. The West and the East both use it. So this is an RPG. And we have this as well. Fins out the back, but we're looking at the cone part here. Now, here we've got RPG. The explosive is the red area. Conical copper liner. Now, as you can see, this actually looks like it's sitting backwards. So you would think that the explosive in this sits this way. It doesn't. Sorry, you can't see that. Sits this way. It doesn't. It sits that way. So why does it do that? Let's talk about it. So, and then we're going to have a little bit of a diagram here. We'll go to this photograph. This part, this is the penetrator. This is what goes into your vehicle and causes so much damage. So as it hits something, this is hitting armor, then this explodes here, this explosive, bending this copper through, bending and inverting this copper, pushing it further. So we see this and then into this. And then from there, it will push through, and this creates basically a molten metal shard to burn through the armour, basically push through the armour, and then explode everything on the other side. This is why you will see killed tanks with a small hole in it from the shaped charge. And shaped charges are what are in heat rounds, your high explosive anti-tank, this shaped charge. So it starts here and then bends in, inverts on itself, and pushes through. So it goes like that, if that makes sense. My arms aren't that manoeuvrable. Is anything different from RPG? No. What's this? This is an N-law. So we see the warhead here. This is the shaped charge. This is the same as the explosive here, shaped charge. And as it goes, it pushes through in the direct attack mode. Now, what do we also see? This is a Javelin. Now, why is a Javelin so deadly? Well, let's talk about this. What do we see here? Shaped charge and explosive. But what we have is the precursor charge. Now we're going to talk about this as well with the ERA, as this is a better counter for that than the cage. But what these are trying to do is pre-ignite these. So if you have the armor on the side and it hits the RPG, it sets it off early. And if it sets off early, then this whole thing we're looking at here doesn't take place as effectively. So you'll get it as far as like this part here just smacking into the side of it and not being as effective against the original armour underneath. Now, the other thing we have seen, and I promise this is going to make sense and this does tie back to the Navy boat. I know I'm carrying on, but the other thing we're seeing a lot is ERA, explosive reactive armour, typically in these tiles. There are a few other types, but we'll talk about these tiles here. And this is the active armour, explosive reactive armour. Now, what does this do? This basically explodes on impact as well, deforming these charges. So when a projectile impacts the ERA, the force and the energy of the impact trigger the explosive material early within the module itself. Now, the detonation of the explosive causes a rapid expansion of gases as an explosive and then a directed blast wave away, again, path of least resistance, away from the bloody tank. Now, this blast wave moves away from the vehicle surface, of course, creating the counterforce that disrupts the incoming shaped charge, or the jet, they're calling it, by deforming and prematurely detonating. So set it off early before impacting the primary armour, so the armour of the actual vehicle. So this is just a diagram of ERA here. Now, it's not the greatest, but this is what we have. So what we would have is down where my mouse is, we would have the original armour, the primary armour of the vehicle. This is the explosive in the middle, and then the face plates here. Now, this is just a very simple diagram. The Russian ones work slightly differently, being on a slight angle, but it's the same concept at least. So the shaped charge is coming in, it strikes here, then this is then caused to explode, then outwards pushing out, and then deforms, prematurely detonating, then it pushing through. Effectively makes the armour significantly thicker than it actually is, and works very well. Now, let's talk about this. This is why the Javelins have then the precursor charge and the main charge, and they also have two motors. So if you ever see a Javelin, I haven't ever been lucky enough to shoot a Javelin, but I am Javelin qualified in the way they work with the clue and the jab. But you'll see it go and then off. That is the launch motor here, and then the flight motor goes from there. So it pops it out of the tube and then takes off. Either direct attack, which you don't see as often, or top attack, which goes up and then comes back down. But back onto the armour. The precursor charge here is to then defeat that ERA, and as well as other standoff armours like your bar armour, or whatever you'd call it as well. And then you have the main charge here. What do we see in both these charges? This inverted cone, this copper cone. So this is what then pushes through that armour there. Now, these ERA tiles, these aren't set off by small caliber rounds. Some say from my reading on them, and I haven't had much to do with these, even if 30mm, which is massive, which is this or bigger, has to have more force than that to actually set it off. So it won't set off just from that. And if one does get hit and explodes by a round, the other ones won't blow up in a chain reaction. Now, they do talk about the threat to other troops or friendly troops around the tank, and I guess that's an issue, but you wouldn't be thinking that's an issue if you're inside the tank and that just went off. But I wouldn't want to be sitting on top if an RPG hit the tank with or without it. Anyway, I know that's a long explanation, but this is why we have explosives that use these shaped charges and the path of least resistance, and using momentum for their advantage, say with the shape charge. Now, where the hell am I going with this? Well, if the kamikaze boat didn't hit straight on, as it does appear to turn to the left and has some level of shaped charge. I don't know exactly how these work, but the damage could be significantly less. Now, a ship basically is a right angle to the water, the big wall of a ship like this. And on one side, with the bottom, you've got, I don't know, a kilometre, 2 kilometres of water. You're not going to go into that at all. And the other one, you basically have a steel wall in the thousands, tens of thousands of tons, and would be, I don't know how thick the walls of a ship are, an inch, or it could be more. But what I'm getting at is on the other side, well, up and out, you have air, and the explosion will follow the path of least resistance. Now, I'm definitely not saying this couldn't cause major damage, but I think this is critical to note as well, because there's so much speculation around the explosive and how much damage it actually did. Well, how much damage did it do? It's anyone's guess. And how much explosives it was actually carrying? Well, that's being highly speculated as well, as it really does depend where the Ivan Kursk was as well. Because if the kamikaze boat did have to go a long way, it would have to sacrifice its explosive for more fuel. Now, do we have other examples of this? Yes, we do. And there's actually been ones shared by the pro-Ukrainian side Twitter pages that are saying it's the Ivan Kursk. And we did clear that up yesterday as well for an American one. But let's have a look at an attack like this when it does go successfully. And I think the best example of this is the Saudi Navy Minder-class frigate that came under attack from 3 Houthi militia, unmanned, said to be Iranian boats. This actually killed 2 sailors aboard. So here we have this, and this is the damage on the bow of the ship, and you can see the video here of them then striking. What does look similar to that very grainy zoomed or far away footage that we did see of the Ivan Kursk as well. So this 2,600 ton, so let's say it's equivalent sort of weight to that, was struck, and this was the damage here. The steering gear compartment was completely destroyed on the initial blast, and the aft crew quarters as well. So then it couldn't steer, had to be rescued and brought back. Didn't come under its own steam. Now we're going to talk more about that as well. And the 2015 US Army assessment on threats from unmanned craft says utilising kamikaze drones is an asymmetric strategy which both allows Iran to compete on an uneven playing field and poses a risk by allowing operators to pick and choose targets of opportunity. This is effective as well, and it does show the extent of damage that can occur to a modern ship. But this is nowhere near the damage that we've seen on footage that has been released, supposedly saying that it is the Ivan Kursk. So let's have a look at some of this footage here. So we have said to be in Sevastopol port, the Ivan Kursk coming back through here. And this has been geolocated that it is definitely in that area. What we don't know is the exact time, but we see it floating in here. And of course, this is on one side, the other side, and we see where these gun turrets are here, said to be a 14.5 or 14.7 mil. I think it's 14.5 mil Dushka round. Yeah, it is 14.5 coming in, and that's what would have been firing at the unmanned drone coming in. But you can't see any significant damage from here, and this isn't translated across. Now, people are saying, what about the other side? Let's have a look at the other side. And if this is the same time, this is today, this is from the other side, we don't see any damage or any significant damage caused on this ship as well. Now, why doesn't the ship have the markings? People are pointing out this should be marked like this, and if you see on any of the footage from either side, it is unmarked. Now, it is common that Russia took off their markings in wartime to confuse the enemy, and they've definitely done this with the Black Sea Fleet, although this one doesn't really matter. We'll talk about that in a second. This is the same as when Ukraine took down or spray painted all of their road signs to confuse the Russian force moving in of where they actually were. Now, could it be the sister ship? As we know, the Ivan Kursk has the equivalent sister ship as well that are very difficult to pick apart of which one is actually which. Well, the Ivan Kursk is the only Yuri Ivanov class Project 18280 surveillance ship that is in the Black Sea's fleet. And as we've talked about, the only ships that can cross into the Black Sea are from the Black Sea fleet from through the Bosphorus. And Ozint also reports that the weather seems to be in line with what is seen in these images. Now, this is the weather here, and it is mostly cloudy. Now, some people are saying that it was very sunny and that the clouds are sitting in this, but that's what we've got at the moment. And we also have a satellite footage here to be said that the Ivan Kursk is back in its port in this bay in Sevastopol as well, that it is back in. Now as well, can these be doctored? Yes. Has this been shared by people that are fairly credible sources? Yes, as well. So after all of that, where do we actually land? Well, unless someone's holding up a newspaper with the date on it, we're going to have to hold off on exactly what happened. But it does seem likely that a drone got to the Afghan coast. Did the drone then malfunction, not explode, or explode, cause light damage, and the coast was able to come home under her own steam? Or is this just fake and there's some Russian new submarine in the Black Sea and it has sunk? It's very difficult. Or what if this is actually all just fake footage as part of some psyop from either side? There's benefits on both, and I've seen nothing yet that couldn't be faked or from previous exercise as well. Now the last thing I want to show you though as well is the Global Hawk, which is a reconnaissance drone flying above the area in which Ryabah said that it was engaged in, a searching pattern, I guess, here. But is it looking for that? We don't know. This is the Bosphorus here. Ukraine sits up around here. But we're pulling two things together. There's no definitive evidence that's what it's there looking at. And if they could release photos of that struck, that would be very good propaganda for Ukraine to share. Hey, look at what we've actually done. We've taken down now a second one of your large ships. Now also Washington is looking into reports that American vehicles supplied to Ukraine were used inside Russia. And this is from what we saw in the incursion of supposed Ukrainian-backed Russian volunteers that went into Russia's Belgorod region earlier this week. Now, Samuel Ramanai, an expert in Russia's military operations at the University of Oxford, when speaking about the equipment, has said, so for Ukraine to pull this off, they absolutely need to do it in deniable fashion through proxies. As we know, Western equipment can't cross into Russia, and the West wouldn't support that. White House National Secretary Council spokesperson John Kirby has said, we again made it very clear to the Ukrainians about what our expectations are about attacking Russia. We don't want to encourage or enable that. We certainly don't want any US-made equipment used to attack Russian soil. And we have gotten assurances from the Ukrainians that they will respect those wishes. We have been very clear that we want Ukraine to be able to defend its own soil, its own territory. They have been attacked, they have been invaded, they have every right to defend themselves. But we have also been clear, well, we don't want to see this war escalate beyond this, the devastation and the violence that is already visited on the Ukrainian people. And as well, there was a lot of speculation about particularly the MRAPs, but also the Humvees that ended up inside Russia's borders. Was it staged? Was it real? Again, I want someone holding up a newspaper at all times. But where we're going to move on to next, and I know we're getting long into this, what are we, like 20 minutes, but will F-16s be a game changer for Ukraine? Well, yes and no. And let's go over this. Well, yes, because it has shown the West is willing to support with more and more high-end equipment, albeit aircraft from almost 50 years ago. But these have had many upgrades and different iterations since this aircraft now is not the same one. It's like if you bought a Toyota Corolla, last year, or bought one from 20 years ago, they're badged Corolla. They may even look similar, but inside they're not the same as well. We know that. But this also grabbed the attention of pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian audience and media globally. And this was a major political win for Ukraine, that they need to keep up those wins, both not on the battlefield, but also in the media. And this possibly opens the door for more weapon opportunities as well. These aircraft are said to be a major leap from the MiG-29 currently being operated in Ukraine, amongst other Soviet era planes as well. The MiG-29 was made 9 years after the F-16 and was really the Soviets' answer to the F-16 and F-15. Now, one of the big no's is we will not see this for many months. Pilots have either just started training or are early in the phase of training. There is argument around this online and not only online, this is from Ukraine and Western sources of, we haven't started training on the Ukraine side, and Western sources are going, they have started. So we don't really know whether officials have misspoken, whether there's some secret being leaked. Don't really know, but we do know for sure if and when, and I say if because I've been saying when for 3 months, but when this offensive kicks off, unless it is at the end of this year, then we will not see F-16s take part, as well as the Abrams. But there's also with the ruling, which America again has put their foot down, of that no Western equipment is to strike in Russia. It greatly reduces the effectiveness of the F-16s and their missions as well, targets and systems inside Russia, so they won't be completely able to do the seed and deed. So suppression and destruction of enemy air defense systems. And talking about striking inside Russia, the Russian planes can also be inside Russia and hit things. And I think that these will be much more highly watched than an MRAP crossing the border. Also, that the F-16 is very difficult to operate and very expensive, and it still can be intercepted by Russian Generation 4 and 4 plus aircraft. Now, some will say Gen 5. Well, the Su-57 hasn't really been confirmed as being a full Gen 5 aircraft, so I'd say Gen 4, and as well as really cutting-edge air defense systems. Russian systems do get a really bad rap, but the S-300, S-400 are still very capable systems, especially against non-stealth targets. Now, the numbers being asked from the official defence of Ukraine are 4 squadrons of F-16s, being 48 aircraft, are exactly what we need to liberate our country from the aggressor. Now, my contact has said that the amount needed would be 144 to effectively support the offensives. That number takes into account the planes grounded for maintenance, planes that will be lost, and also support during mission capability, which is huge, and a number a lot larger than anyone is currently talking about. We've seen a number of MiG-29 Fulcrum aircraft transferred from Slovakia and Poland to Ukraine, and we haven't seen any significant change in the air power or air used on the front line. But a Fulcrum is a Soviet-era fighter, compared to an F-16. Well, these are both Cold War era planes, and yes, they've both received upgrades. Definitely the F-16 has got more and is more usable with more capable systems, but the difference from my armchair back here still seems comparable, as we actually don't know exactly what integration of F-16 will be deployed. But if we're going in line with the other systems given to Ukraine, it definitely won't be the newest variant. Now, this is not like comparing an F-35 to a Fulcrum. We know this because a number of allied countries have flown F-16 against MiG-29. We've also seen F-16 versus S-400 as well. That's how Turkey got in trouble. But F-16 versus MiG-29. Now, I'll link below the full article and what happened from the history here, but Captain Mike McCoy, one of the 510th F-16 pilots, flew against a JG-73 MiG-29s, and this was in Germany before Germany transitioned away. But the most aspect of the Fulcrum's performance for the American pilots was its low-speed manoeuvrability combined with its helmet-mounted sight system, saying in a low-speed fight, fighting the Fulcrum is similar to fighting an F-18 Hornet, but the Fulcrum has a thrust advantage over the Hornet, and F-18 can really crank its nose around if you get into a slow speed fight, but it has to lose altitude to regain energy, which allows us to get on top of them. The MiG has about the same nose authority at slow speeds, but can regain energy much faster. Plus, MiG pilots have that 45-degree cone in front of them that into which they can fire an Archer and eat you up. As well, saying some of the capabilities were more wicked than we originally thought. We had to respect the helmet-mounted sight, which made our decision to anchor more difficult. In other words, when I got close in, I had to consider that the helmet-mounted sight, every time I got near the Fulcrum's nose, I was releasing flares to defeat an Archer coming off its rail. I use this as an example that the Fulcrum is not as good as an F-16. We know that the F-16 is more. Is it this? No, it's more like this. They were built the same era, built to counter basically each other. And yes, the F-16's got more upgrades, but is it a completely different, plane like an F-35, like some sort of stealth fighter? Absolutely not. Now, an alliance has been formed to train these pilots, and planes are 100% definitely coming from the States and will likely also come from Denmark and the Netherlands, as well as several other countries that are operating these. And there is some weird deal going down with Argentina to not get them to not purchase Chinese aircraft. Maybe I'll get into that because that was interesting as well. Continuing on this, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs Staff, Mark Miley, has had some interesting statements about this. Now, everyone jumps on me when I'm quoting Miley, but don't shoot the message. He's still a very senior authority in this and has an overview more so than we do looking at Twitter and Telegram. Now, he cautioned on Thursday, there are no magic weapons in this war. F-16s are not, and neither is anything else. And we talked about that, but we can also say that then the Kinzal, we know the Kinzal was being promoted as an invincible wonder weapon, but is not so far. But He also said the Russians have 1,000 fourth-generation fighters. If you're going to contest Russia in the air, you're going to need a substantial amount of fourth and fifth-generation fighters. So if you look at the constant curve and do the analysis, the smartest thing to have done is exactly what we did do, which is provide a significant amount of integrated air defence to cover the battle space and deny the Russians the airspace. Now, my question would be, if I was one of the big journalists sitting in there, would have been, well, how has Russia failed to gain the airspace even before any of these new integrated defence was put in place? Also, Air Force Secretary Frank Kendall has said earlier this week that the jets are not going to be a dramatic game changer for Ukraine, though it's something that makes sense for them. It's going to help them in the long run. Mark Miley also defended not sending these planes earlier, saying if you look at the F-16s, 10 F-16s cost $1 billion. The sustainment cost another $1 billion. So you're talking about $2 billion for 10 aircraft that would have eaten into the funding for the other systems that the US sent. But I think a lot of these numbers are of new F-16s or the replacement for an F-16. So what we're saying, we've talked about the accounting errors the Pentagon has before, that if they send an F-16 from the 80s, then they have to purchase an F-35 to replace that, and a lot of the accounting is, well, an F-35 costs, I don't know, let's throw out a figure of $100 million, and an F-16 costs $80 million, but we're not adding that $80 million to the budget, we're adding the $100 million to cover that. So it's a little bit difficult. This is where the Biden administration has found a bit more money. But I do think the F-16s are not about them changing the war. It's setting a new standard for weapon procurements and the West's ambition to make Ukraine a military make the Ukrainian military a NATO standard military, both in training of soldiers, as we've already seen, and the equipment we've seen on the ground, but not yet in the air or sea. But this sets a standard for what we could see coming next. But that's it for me today, guys. I really hope you're well. If you'd like to support me, links down below. Sorry this was a long one, but I just got caught away typing and writing and researching, and that happens. But look after yourself, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you.